I would like, if I may, to take you on a strange journey.
Hello and welcome to the Cultworthy Cinema Podcast. I'm your host, Antonio, and returning to this show for the first time since we started doing video is my good friend, Stephen Hayes. Stephen, what's going on?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I've been told I have radio looks. I don't know what that means, but...
It means that your voice is smoother than your complexion.
Thank you for clarifying.
So we haven't had you on the show for a while because, I don't know, life and stuff like that, but we normally don't talk about a single movie. We usually talk about a broader subjects. For example, we did private detective movies. We did 90s neo-noir, legacy sequels. I think one of my favorite conversations was the one that we did about second thought films that we liked in our youth, and then as we got older decided they're not as cool as we thought they were.
So, like Garden State, stuff like that.
Garden State comes up all the time, and not just between you and me. Like, we had a conversation with a friend who we hadn't seen like in a decade. He's like, remember how we used to like Garden State? It's like, don't remind me.
All right. What are we talking about today?
So before we get into that, we got a very big movie opening tomorrow that we just secured tickets for.
Right.
It's a sequel to, or actually I should say a prequel to, one of our favorite sequels of all times, and that is Mad Max Fury Road. And it's the Furiosa movie.
Right. I'm actually really looking forward to it. I had such a good time, especially in the theater, seeing Fury Road for the first time.
Well, and I think you and I have had this conversation many times where it's like, when we ask each other, what is our favorite movie of the 2010s? I always say Fury Road, but I have a hard time putting a movie above it for my favorite movie of the 21st century.
I mean, there's some cool movies back this last 15 years. I love Drive. Like, there's some things where I just had really cool movie watching experiences. And overall, yeah, Fury Road, I don't think anything tops it for me.
It doesn't. Like, Drive would be a very, very close second. We did talk about how, you know, film nerds, and us included, put There Will Be Blood very high on the list. I think I see it usually number one on a lot of people's lists, but it just doesn't top Fury Road. Theatrically and rewatchability.
That's the thing, is if it's not a movie you flip past, you're going to be like, oh, let's pop that in. Like,
right.
That's a taller order.
I don't get a boner for There Will Be Blood where I have to go home and put it on and watch it.
Right.
But I will literally watch Fury Road several times a year, even the black and white version. Like, there's just something that it's not that you discover something new every time you rewatch it. It's just, to me, it's the majesty of it. It's like I get more and more impressed every time I watch it.
And, you know, I talked about, because we've talked about this movie before.
Yeah.
I did mention this before, and I still have to hit this point that I would like that movie so much more if it had been Mel Gibson.
Right.
Like, I want old Mel Gibson doing some mean-ass action. I love the movie.
Yeah.
Even insert actor here. Like, Tom Hardy was fine. It is really more of her movie, but that's still a bummer for me. This movie at least doesn't have that issue. Like, it's not something that it has to deal with.
And we're going to get into more Mad Max in this conversation, because what we're going to be doing today is we are going to go through IMDB's poll of top 25 sequels that people consider better than the original. Now, Mad Max Fury Road, The Road Warrior, those definitely end up on my list of sequels that are better than the original. But let's get into like the more cynical side of this, because at the end of the day, we are kind of cynical assholes when it comes to cinema. Like, yeah, we have a movie nerd mentality with a kind of, I'm going to say, douchebaggery cynicism of like,
sure, but
fuck you guys and your film school art house opinions. I mean, I have the podcast, right? But it's not waxing poetic about all the nuances and references to other movies all the time. That's why I don't go to the art house theater in Salt Lake all the time, is because I get sucked into these conversations. with these dudes
Right.
that they just sit and watch movies all day and write paragraphs about them on Letterboxd and then recite them to anyone who'll listen in the theater. Yeah, I'm friends with a lot of those guys, but at the same time, I don't consider myself one of those guys.
Well, they always tell you why something is so obviously better than blah blah blah. It's not opinion, it's fact, and
It's
it's like,
fact.
oh, shove your fact.
And I'm so about like it's all subjective, right? Art and what you appreciate, what you find beautiful, what you find entertaining. And this is the point that I also wanted to bring up before we jump into this list. I am a huge proponent of better doesn't necessarily mean it should be your favorite. I've got favorites of lots of things, but I am 100% on board saying that no, it is not better than something else. It's just my favorite.
Right.
It might be shoddy. It might be a lower budget movie. It might have some terrible acting.
So, like, for example, talking sequels, like
Yeah.
your favorite Grease movie is probably Grease 2. It's not better than the first one.
You are literally like the third person to bring up Grease 2 in the last
Your
2 weeks.
favorite Wizard of Oz movie would be Return to Oz.
Kind of is.
I mean, like,
this is the cult-worthy
Sure,
cinema podcast.
I got it.
Right. No, but like that's the other thing too is that there are people who
Cultworthy. Let's go Cultworthy. Let's say Escape from LA is your favorite.
it kind of is.
Oh God, just stop.
But again, that's the subjectivity of it, man. Where it's like I can say something that is my favorite, but I will 100% say that Escape from LA is not better than as a film than Escape from New York. But I think it's more fun and it's my favorite in that aspect.
You just love the basketball scene, the surfing. Like there's so much.
Peter
There's so much to love.
Peter Fonda on a surfboard in front of an obvious blue screen going down the LA River. It's fucking great, man. Steve Buscemi, Pam Grier as a trans woman. So, anyway.
All right. Let's get to your list. That's our cue.
That's our cue to jump into this. So we've kind of narrowed down those points. Favorite doesn't necessarily mean better, and better doesn't automatically mean favorite, right?
Tricky part on this list is also sequel doesn't mean sequel. Like, what is a sequel? But we'll talk about that.
Yeah, we can get into the nuances of it as we get down. So, number one, and again, this is poll. In my opinion, on people who take the time out of their day to answer poll questions, they got way too much fucking time on their hands, and I don't necessarily trust their judgment, but this is what we're going with. This is the data we have, so we're going to roll with it. Number one, with the highest percentage of votes to sequel better than the original is 2008's The Dark Knight, directed by Christopher Nolan.
I think that's probably a pretty good top of the list movie to have on there.
I mean, it makes sense. It makes sense data-wise, and when you talk to people, yeah, everyone talks about The Dark Knight being potentially like the best comic book movie ever. I'm a little bit on the side of like, it's fine. I like the movie. I think there's way too much movie in it. I think Heath Ledger's performance is what weighs people into the whole, this is a better movie than the first one, because it's hard to not talk about The Dark Knight and not talk about Heath Ledger as the Joker.
But there's things that it really did fix as far as movie one versus movie two. And I give lots of weight to these movies on episode one for the world building that they have to do. I mean, the world building is a big deal. And that's a really cool thing about them is they had to create all of this. Like it really holds a lot of weight for me, what they've had to come up with. That's going to apply to this Mad Max movie also. Like the world building that they did that in, and again, I don't want to jump movies, but they did that in Fury Road. They didn't really do that in the previous ones, in my opinion. I think they did that in Fury Road, what this world is that we're looking at. I think the same thing goes for other movies like Blade Runner. That now, it's like, yeah, sure, you went and made a great movie all these years later. I loved that sequel. It's a cool one for your list even. I don't think it's on this poll. But the world building already happened like 40 years ago, more than 40 years ago.
And it's up to people to either remember it themselves or go back and rediscover it before they see a sequel that's had such a huge gap. I think that the first Nolan Batman film, Batman Begins, I think it did a really good job at us getting used to the idea of Christian Bale being Batman, but the aesthetic is so different. Because in the first one, they really push hard and like, this is a comic book movie.
Right.
The city looks a little bit fantastical.
It's a little more
the
real.
set pieces. And where Dark Knight, I mean, everyone always says that, oh, it feels like a Michael Mann movie where they're shooting it like in Chicago and it looks real. It's real cityscapes. It's not these intricate comic book set pieces. The intro itself, it's a heist and it feels like a Michael Mann movie.
I mean, from second one, it's
right.
From second one of that movie, that first shot pushing into the building, the beginning of the bank robbery, like the tone that he hit with it right there for me was like awesome. Like this is how I want this movie to be. The fantastical stuff that I feel like he got rid of, driving the damn car across the rooftops in Batman Begins.
Right.
It's that kind of shit that it's like, sure, you have your
superhero moment,
but your suspension of disbelief stuff, and it's
right.
like putting it in the real world was pretty cool in episode 2,
right?
Basically.
And there's one thing about Dark Knight I'm a little bit on the fence of. They do it a lot more in the third one, where as the sequels go on, Batman becomes less and less and less of like the centerpiece of the movie, and they spend a lot more time with like the other characters in the movie. So you spend a lot more time with Harvey Dent and Maggie Gyllenhaal's character and Commissioner Gordon. And then in the third one, they fucking just take Batman out of half the movie and you just
drop him in a hole.
You spend it in, this city under siege and Bane is kind of taken over. I don't hate that, but again, it's an interesting attack on how you're going to make your comic book movie. So if I had to pick out of all three of the Nolan verse, yeah, Dark Knight probably is my favorite. I'm just saying that sometimes I think it's a little bit overhyped, and I think that overhype is from the Heath Ledger performance. I mean, who do you know? Like, everyone has a friend that dressed up like Heath Ledger for at least 5 years for Halloween.
Right. But, the third act of that movie drags a little bit.
Forever. It's got 3 endings.
But there's some cool stuff. The heist is cool.
Yeah.
When he pulls the guy out of the building in Hong Kong.
That's cool.
Is cool. Like, there's some cool stuff in that movie for sure.
Agreed. This one's going to be controversial. Number 2 with 4,748 votes. Terminator 2 Judgment Day over Terminator 1.
Terminator 1 was a cool movie, but it was low budget, the hokey music, all that kind of stuff. Like going full bore and doing the big badass action movie that T2 was. I mean, it really popped off. It was a cool movie. It's still a cool movie.
It's still a cool movie, and I get it. I think it's a very fair assessment. I'm Terminator 1 all day because I'm lo-fi, right? I like the John Carpenter sounding synth score in the background.
Right.
I like that it's lo-fi. I like that you could watch this on the big screen and you could watch it at home on a TV, and it's just as enjoyable. One of my things with James Cameron is there is a rewatchability to his movies, but his movies are so grand that you feel like you're missing out of not seeing it on a big screen. Like, he makes movies for the theater.
Right.
He really doesn't make movies for home video. So even though T2 was like huge on home video, I remember having the VHS of it back in the day and being pissed off because it just seemed so small because it was shot so grand.
Right.
Where T1 is like, it's lo-fi, it's really handheld, it's like guerrilla style filmmaking, and that plays well at home for your rewatchability factor.
Well, I get that. Like, if I was going to go watch one of those, in all fairness, I'm only going to watch the first one. I don't see myself for any reason watching T2. Like, maybe if it popped up, I'd watch the director cut version.
Right.
But like, to just go watch Edward Furlong be a weenie, like,
Edward Furlong kills it for me, bro. That's one of the things that really hurts that movie for me.
Yeah.
I cannot stand that performance. And I think a lot of people have that same opinion. It's just there's so much good in the movie that outweighs it. I mean, Sarah Connor's a badass. T-1000's fucking sweet. Like, it is a really, really, really good sequel. I think that's just my biggest complaint. Is like, again, rewatchability factor, and it's long.
It's the biggest complaint for sure.
Yeah,
no question.
All right, so again, controversial subject for number 3 with 2,360 votes. Star Wars Episode 5: Empire Strikes Back. So I'm assuming they're going just original trilogy here,
right? And I get that, and that's when you talk about, okay, what is a true sequel? Right. I mean, that was a true sequel until it became Episode 5 of a
saga.
Saga that's now 29 films deep.
and series and extended universe and all this other stuff, cartoons.
But okay, let's talk trilogy. If we're gonna talk trilogy, sequel, cool movie, I have to give so much weight again to the world building that happened. There's so many ways that Star Wars could have and should have been such a hokey, stupid movie.
I mean, apparently it was. Apparently the original cut of the movie was so bad and hokey and cheesy that they were just going to trash it. And it was George Lucas, his wife at the time, who re-edited the movie into pretty much what it is now and saved it. Because it really did have like that Flash Gordon 50s kind of cheesy, nonsensical vibe to it.
So having it shot as that and turned into what it was, I got to go with Star Wars, man. New Hope.
Yeah, 100%. And I don't like any of the sequels or the extended sequels or the prequels, and I think they pop up later, but we might just skip those. Again, going into the whole saga thing. So now we've got number 4 with 2,224 votes, Lord of the Rings, Return of the King. So this is one of the things that I think is interesting about this is that, yeah, there's sequels, but don't they just kind of tell one big story? Like it is a saga.
Right. I mean, they were split up into books originally.
Right.
So you can give it that. But at the same time, okay, if I'm going to vote on this, in that series of 3 movies, if we're talking about the 3 movies, I actually like the second one better.
I like the second one better. I like part 2 the best because it doesn't bog down. I always have a problem with thirds in movies because it feels like they have to wrap up a story. And then it takes like a good half hour of your third act of just wrapping that shit up.
I mean, what was our nickname for the 2 sequels? What was our nickname for all 3 movies back then?
Board of the Rings.
No, Hobbits Walking.
Hobbits Walking. I always liked Board of the Rings.
Did you like Hobbits Walking 1, 2, or 3? I dug 2. I thought the end battle was one of the coolest things ever put on film.
Right. And then like they had to outdo it in the third one. And that was the problem with the third one is that, in my opinion, it just was too outlandish. Same thing with in his remake of King Kong, the Brontosaurus Stampede. Like I bet it sounded great on paper, but on film, it did not work for me. And I think where it jumped the shark for me in part 3 is when Legolas like kills one of the big mastodons and then like surfboards down its tusk and does a superhero landing. I was like, you lost me, movie.
So shit like that inserted. And then the 40 minutes after the movie's over it's like, guys, I'd rather pee than watch the end of this, and you're killing me right now. Like, that's all I remember about that movie.
I'm not going to sum it up in my own words. I'm going to go say watch Clerks 2, and Randall's description of the Lord of the Rings Part 3 ending is exactly how I feel about it. So just Google that, YouTube that, and it's my thoughts exactly. All right, so this is now back into our realm, our territory, away from like some of these bigger things. So number 5 with 2,203 votes is The Godfather Part 2. 1974, is it better than Part 1?
Better is such a hard word.
It's a hard word. That's why I like better. There's better and favorite. So here's my thing. I'm going to say yes, I like Godfather 2 better than Part 1 because it's got De Niro, it's got all that great, like you said, world building. This is a movie that kind of does it in reverse, where it's giving you a prequel and a sequel at the same time.
And builds another world.
And it gets you more interested in like the family dynamic instead of just the mob aspect of the first one. But I can't just watch Godfather 1 and not watch 2. Like I plan my day. It's usually Thanksgiving where I watch all 3 movies because that's how it works for me. I just can't watch one of them. I have to watch these 2 movies back to back.
And I'll insert that nuance that no, it's not number 3.
Yeah, right. Well, and then on VHS downstairs, I have the Godfather experience. And it's where Coppola
chopped it in order,
chopped it into chronological order 1 and 2. And there's a lot of missing scenes,
which I've never watched.
It's really, really cool. I think you can find it on YouTube, but it's one of those things where like they did it for TV and they gave it a special edition VHS release. It's never been on DVD or Blu-ray, but it just makes the story make a lot more sense for some people. I mean, think about people who've walked into Godfather Part 2 and not seeing Part 1. People do that. People will watch a sequel before they've seen the original, and you're like, what the fuck?
I mean, there's some of that inside of this list where it doesn't necessarily matter for some movies, which
Yeah.
also affects my sequel word on these. God, I'm gonna cop out, and I'm not gonna answer which one is.
Yeah, that's fine.
It's
hard.
I don't think that's one where I'm gonna pick which one's better. I mean, Godfather is the epic high, when if not the highest rated movie, one of the highest rated movies of all time.
Yeah.
And it earned it for lots of reasons because of what they pulled off with that movie. So I'm not gonna vote. Let's look at it as a big saga.
Yeah.
You
Where
know-
it's not trying to outdo its original. It's not trying. I guess that's the other way to put it too, is like, obviously a lot of these sequels were made to financially bank off of the popularity of the first one. And then there are movies like this where the sequel was meant to expand a story that people loved.
Kill Bill.
Exactly.
Kill Bill's. I mean, this is a little different than that, or at least it turns into a different than that when you add the third.
Yeah.
Like that kind of kills that argument. But Kill Bill was one story split into two movies.
100%. So number 6, 1986's Aliens with 1,711 votes over the Ridley Scott original.
So what's interesting about this one is they really are two different kinds of movies.
They are.
Like one is a
Claustrophobic.
horror suspense movie. The other one is a big ass action movie.
Mhm.
And I think this really comes down to what kind of movie do you prefer?
Yeah.
Ultimately, if I have to pick out of the two of these movies, I'm going to go with Ridley Scott.
Me too.
Is Aliens a badass, awesome movie? Absolutely. It's kind of apples and oranges.
I mean, the space horror aspect of the first one is 100% like original.
Right.
Between like the script by Dan O'Bannon and Ronald Shusett, and then the way Ridley Scott directs it, and the performances in it, like the actors, what they bring to the table. I mean, I think Veronica Cartwright is like one of the best like scream frightening actresses of all time. And like, you don't like her, and that's the point. Like, because she's like the Hudson
Right.
of that one. Where Aliens, again, too, it's like, okay, I love Aliens. I saw it in the theater on the same day as Flight of the Navigator. My dad took me into one and then into
Wow.
the other.
You were a baby.
I was a baby, but yeah, it sticks with me. But again, it's that rewatchability factor of like, there's so much going on that I want to watch Aliens in the right format. I want to watch it big. I want to watch it loud.
Right.
And sometimes you don't have the opportunity for that. But Alien is so lo-fi. Again, I can just watch that anytime on pretty
Right.
much any format. So yeah,
I get that. And, it's Alien that is the one that go pop up on the big screen every here and there.
yeah, it gets the anniversary releases for sure. Now this one, number 7, is interesting because.
Sorry, let me go
ahead.
back.
Yeah,
Back to Alien a little bit. A cool thing about James Cameron's sequel is that he went, I am not going to try to do that again. Like I'm going to do something different with what this is. Like what a cool choice. Like people trying to, especially when it's whether it's the same director or not, it's like trying to just knock off the thing that you've already done, and it feels like kind of a cash grab. This didn't feel the same way. Like it was like, this is going to be awesome. Like,
right.
And they prove how far he's going with that with the fight at the end.
And there was enough time between the two where it didn't feel like it was a rushed production.
Right.
I think that's one of the things too that we see these days where it's like, okay, we got to get a sequel out. We got to get a sequel out. And you feel how rushed it is when you're watching it, especially now that Marvel's putting out a sequel to everything like every 2 years, and Star Wars, the same thing,
Right.
Pushing the brakes on that, I think, is a good decision. Let people rest and recoup and give them some time to realize how much they enjoyed that first one before you start force feeding them whatever nonsense that you're trying to get a
Right.
cash grab out of.
The cash grabs are rough.
So this is another interesting one because I think a lot of people don't realize that it is a sequel, and it kind of is and isn't. It's just part of a universal trilogy, the Man with No Name trilogy. Sergio Leone's Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, Fistful of Dollars, Few Dollars More.
I mean, technically, chronologically, I believe Good, Bad, and the Ugly is
First,
even though it's the last one that came out.
right? So with this one, I think that it kind of stands alone. I look at fistful of dollars and few dollars more, a little bit more cohesive than this one, even though it is The Man with No Name. It's almost like the Mad Max ethos, what we'll talk about, where almost like James Bond too, where we get different actors playing these characters throughout time because it's the character that's universal, not necessarily the actor.
Right.
Because there's lots of spaghetti westerns out there that could really fit into the same dynamic. They just don't star Clint Eastwood. But there's Man with No Name movies, you know.
I mean, of the 3 movies, if that's what we're talking about, I do like this one the best.
It's 100% my favorite.
But a nuance to it also is, you know, these are, if you were to read Western novels, it's kind of the same thing where they are just standalone Westerns. Like this is that. It's basically a Western novel turned into a movie. I think that totally applies to this. It's this character that you don't need to know anything.
Yeah.
That's kind of where you lose the sequel aspect of it.
Yeah.
Is it doesn't matter who this is. You just roll in and it's a movie. So if you watch this and you haven't watched the other movies, it doesn't change anything.
It doesn't, not at all.
And that goes for all 3 of the movies.
Yeah, I agree. So let's not dwell too much on that one, but this next one, number 8, with 782 votes over the original Star Trek II Wrath of Khan. I agree, 100%.
I mean, it's no brainer.
It's a no-brainer.
Star Trek motion picture was kind of a turd.
It was a turd financially, like it wasn't as big as they expected, but it was big enough to get a sequel, and at least they learned the lesson of what Star Trek people wanted versus what they didn't want. I've gone back and I have a new appreciation for the motion picture. Like, it is gorgeous. It's a beautiful production. It looks so much better than Star Wars. Like, the intricacies of the special effects is so much better, but the movie is dull.
Right.
And that's what goes against it, where now with this one, they bring a real villain, not like this esoteric, ethereal entity. Right. They bring a real villain that you can look at and listen to, and he's charming and magnetic, and he's dangerous. And it gives Kirk the opportunity to ham it the fuck up, to go off against this guy. And that's where the moments really, really...
Saying ham it up against...
Ricardo
Montalban.
And it feels like a Star Trek again. Like, my biggest issue with the original motion picture is that we have all of the original cast members in that movie, but they don't do anything.
Right.
Like, all of the quirky things that we were used to them in the classic series, they don't get an opportunity to do in the motion picture. And then they all get to do it in this one. Bones gets to be Bonesy, and Spock gets to be Spocky, and Chekhov gets the earwig thing in his head. Like, that's all cool shit.
The whole movie is really well done, and there's not an act of it that really drags too much. I mean, the slowest part for me of the whole movie is the little bit of time where they're down in their
cave
and whatever. Like, that's a little bit slow, but I mean, movie is happening, and then suddenly when it's like, okay, we actually do know where they are, and they get picked up, and now they're suddenly in the fight. Like, it slowed down enough to suddenly be like, oh no, we're in business. Like, you guys just know we're in business, but here we go.
Yeah, and it doesn't stop until the end. And a great ending.
Right.
Right.
So it did have a purpose the minute where it dragged, where some movies just drag because they, in my opinion, a lot of the time, if a movie drags somewhere and that's the way it feels, it's missed the boat. Lord of the Rings, dragged too much, missed the boat. Dark Knight, our top of the list on here, dragged too much.
It drags a lot, 100%. And the third one drags a lot more. So while we're on the Star Trek subject, you and I have said for a long time that...
Yeah, in the third one, I just wanted the damn bomb to go off at some point. I like the movie, but please just blow it up. That'd be awesome.
In the Star Trek universe, we've talked about it offline before, but Star Trek II is not my favorite Star Trek sequel. I will agree it is the best, but it's not my favorite. My favorite is Star Trek VI, Undiscovered Country. And I don't know if you've changed your opinion, but for the longest time, you had a very similar feeling about it.
No, I like that too, but also I've got the nuance that that's the one that I was old enough to see in the theater.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I saw 4, 5, and 6 in the theater of the original Star Wars series.
I don't know if I saw 5, which was
it's the lesser of the sequels.
It's another turd movie, but 6 was pretty badass. Plumber was
4 is just weird.
Plumber was awesome in it.
Oh yeah, Plumber. So they got a great villain in Star Trek 6. You get to have Sulu as a captain, and he's flying the Excelsior. Like, there's a lot of cool storytelling. The prison planet's cool. Imana's hot as the alien. Like, I like it.
But she's hot. Also, back then I had a
Kim Cattrall.
I had a hard on. I had Mannequin on tape, and yeah, I did.
Yeah, we didn't get enough cool, like, so we had Savick.
Before she turned into that old whore.
You mean in 1998? Okay, so number 9 with 750 votes over the original Mad Max 2, aka The Road Warrior. I mean that's a no-brainer.
This could be top of this list.
Could be top of the list, 100%.
Based on, I have no desire to watch Mad Max. Like, I don't go watch the original.
Yeah, I mean, it's nostalgia's sake, I'll watch it.
Nostalgia's sake, I watched this one. I watched Road Warrior.
I just watched Road Warrior for the hell of it.
I watched it in the last 4 days, probably.
Right.
Like, just because it was there, I went, oh, I'm going to click on that. Road Warrior was there. That never happens with me.
And, people right now on Letterboxd and IMDb, you're seeing the scores for Fury Road just go way up because of Furiosa coming out. But now everyone's rewatching this one too because they know it's good. They know how good it is.
Right.
It doesn't play it safe. Like, it really dives deep into the Ozploitation where it's really violent, but also it's just a really good story. The characters are good. Max does bring like that kind of man with no name, Clint Eastwood feeling to this movie. He doesn't have so much characterization in part 3, which I think ruins it for me. It keeps him mysterious, and I think that's what makes this one work.
And then just watching the chase, especially the chase at the end.
Yeah.
Just going, oh my God, that guy's dead. Like,
right.
like that gives it some weight. It's like these guys killed themselves to make this cool scene for us.
Right.
Like, I don't really look at the new ones as like it. To me, it just doesn't count. Like,
it feels like
they're not competing against each other.
No, they're not.
Furiosa, sure, you can compete it with Fury Road. I'm not competing Mad Max with Furiosa. Like, they're the same world. They're just not the same film series to me. And then, Thunderdome, I'm good.
I rewatched Thunderdome lately, and it's better than I remember, but it suffers from being PG-13, and it suffers from being very Americanized. Like, that's where they had like an American studio co-produce it, and It feels like it. It does feel like an American production. And again, I just have a hard time with kids in movies, and it's like
that's
kids.
The worst part of it. That's the hardest part of it is the crap with the kids, and I'm just like, I don't need that.
Right. Although Master Blaster is pretty cool. All right, jumping into number 10, I have so little horses in this race, and it's the Harry Potter series. 2004's Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban with 693 votes. Now, I will tell you, of all the ones I have seen, which I don't think I saw like the last 4.
I'm in the same boat. I thought I was going to be conceding something that I hadn't seen all these movies. I didn't know you hadn't seen them all.
I know, I hadn't.
They're fine, like they're these big whatever movies, but the hype around them.
I just wasn't part of that universe.
Right. The hype, and you came out of working at
Barnes and Noble when this came out. Yeah,
when it was all the biggest thing in the world was Harry Potter, and it was like, is it? Yeah, I don't care enough to weigh into these, and that's not even the second movie, right? It's just one out of the series.
This is the third one, and this one, in my opinion, is my favorite one because it's the one that introduced Gary Oldman, and Alfonso Cuarón directed it. So it did have like some
that
darkness to it.
Yeah.
And I'm almost of the opinion that I think they felt it went too dark because then they started making it lighter and lighter and lighter as it went along. Not as dangerous,
Gotcha. I mean, I wouldn't even know.
I
can't name enough about these movies to even weigh in on this, but
same.
So let's blow past that.
Blow past it. Maybe the most controversial on this list with 502 votes, 1987's Evil Dead 2, which brings it to the question, just because there's a 2 at the end, is it truly a sequel?
I mean, it's not so much a remake as a redo.
It's a redo. Yeah.
Like and there's other movies on this list or just in this sequel world that are kind of the same thing where it's like, okay, somebody made one and now the director kind of figured it out, got some money, T2 is a version of that where it's like, okay, obviously the budget was substantially different
Right.
for T2 versus Terminator. I mean, just even Schwarzenegger. Wow.
You're thinking of Last Action Hero when they're in that alternate
Right.
universe and Stallone plays Terminator 2.
Perfect. That's all I think about is Last Action Hero. Schwarzenegger, the way he changed over that, 8 years between the two movies? I mean, obviously, Terminator is part of what helped blow him up into the star that he became. I mean, he was a big star in the 80s, obviously. But, like, the way it ramped up in that time frame, he just became more expensive. Everything about it kind of ramped up with him.
Agreed.
That movie. Evil Dead's an example where it's like, okay, Sam Raimi is a kid figuring out how to make a movie. There's still a lot of that to Evil Dead 2, but I mean, the jump from what he did with no money to what he did with some money.
Yeah, like I would say that the way that you can compare it to modern day filmmakers is when Quentin Tarantino started pushing Eli Roth after Cabin Fever came out. Like, here's a kid who made this little cheap horror movie, and now, okay, well, I'm going to start using him and pushing his, out into the radar. Peter Jackson, same thing with Edgar Wright and Shaun of the Dead. Like, Shaun of the Dead was stuck in the UK, and it was Peter Jackson who was like, this is pretty brilliant, and helped them get it out there.
Right.
Stephen King was the one that really pushed Evil Dead 1, saying, hey, guys, this kid made a really great movie. It's funny, it's violent, it's gory.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and then like 4 or 5 years later, that kind of got him enough on the radar to get Evil Dead 2 made. And guys, if you want to like hear more about the history on I want to say it was like the 1998 or 1999 DVD release, their commentary, Bruce Campbell, I think it's Rob Tapert and Sam Raimi, where they even talk about it that they don't even really know if it's truly a sequel. Because Bruce was like, yeah, I was always wondering, Sam, it's like, would Ash be dumb enough to go to the same cabin twice?
Right.
Like.
Now, obviously a different movie, but it just so happens that this is one of both of our favorite movies.
It really is.
Period.
It really is. It really is. And I have a brand new appreciation. I might say brand new. I do have a revitalized opinion of Evil Dead 1. Like, if you go into Evil Dead 1 not expecting Evil Dead 2, you're going to have a lot better time watching it.
Right.
I think my biggest issue is I saw Army of Darkness first.
Okay.
So I saw that in the theater. And then we rediscovered part 2, and then we went back and watched 1, and they got progressively disappointing because we were expecting all the manic stuff. And
but again, 2 is so much better than Army of Darkness.
It really is.
Army of Darkness has fun stuff. I like Army of Darkness, but
it's also not like a horror movie. It doesn't feel like an Evil Dead movie.
So
it feels more like a Jason the Argonauts fantasy movie.
Right.
Okay, so we're going to blow past Toy Story.
Or some Gulliver. You got some Gulliver in there.
That's true. We're going to blow past Lord of the Rings because we already talked about it. Okay, this is a good one. Number 14 with 370 votes. Spider-Man 2, 2004, as opposed to Spider-Man 1 from 2002.
So this is one of those ones where I like Spider-Man 2. I thought it was cool.
Yeah.
I am going to give my weight to the world building that happened and the tone building that happened in Spider-Man. So I'm going to go with Spider-Man.
I agree. I think that Alfred Molina is an amazing villain as Dr. Octopus, but I'm not as excited to watch Spider-Man 2 as I am. Like, Spider-Man 1 still is really cool. Like, when he's, I hate origin stories. Like, most of us know an origin story from either the comic book or a previous version of the movie or a TV show, whatever. And I liked that they made it very different and unique in this one. And then in Spider-Man 2, it really focuses on like the love story between those two. And that's, to me, the least important and least interesting part of the movie. I like what number 1 does, where it's really more like him, but the downfall of Willem Dafoe's Green Goblin character and that depth into madness. I like that. That's entertaining to me.
And just Willem Dafoe, it's just, he's so fun to watch.
Perfect person for that.
Especially having him do Over the Top and having him do Over the Top directed by Sam Raimi. Yeah. We know we both are just big fans of. So it's the Sam Raimi stuff also, that inserting the Sam Raimi isms into a comic book movie like this is what made this Spider-Man series. I mean, it blew up the whole comic book genre into what it's turned into. Like,
it did.
The whole Marvel verse and all that stuff. in my opinion, doesn't land where it has at this
Without-
point without this movie popping off the way
Right.
it did. This really
At
changed.
least the first two.
This changed everything. Not that we didn't have big Batman movies back in the 90s. This was a totally different thing that it started.
Agreed. So number 15, with 334 votes above the original, is The Bourne Supremacy from 2004. I'm going to tell you right now, number 1, Doug Liman, 100% my favorite, because Greengrass.
All Greengrass.
Paul Greengrass, thank you. His shaky cam bullshit.
So the shaky cam thing, when it came out, it was a big deal that people talked about. And here's where I've landed with it is the shaky cam was nauseating in the theater, and it actually kind of kicks ass on small screen.
Interesting, because I've only rewatched any of these once after the theater version.
So there's a lot more of the shaky cam stuff that has happened in the 20 years since this came out, and it works on small screen. Again, big screen, it's like, well, just show me what the hell is happening.
Right.
So, I don't know, look at it with those eyes. Doesn't mean I'm going to give this my number 1 spot. I like this movie. But again,
I like Carl Urban. He's a good bad guy. Like, it works for me. All the Bourne movies are, it's just man on the run and fighting, right? And I like that. Some people might find it exhausting. I think it's okay. I think that if you're knowing what you're signing up for, you're going to have a good time. Like I said, my biggest hindrance of liking any of the movies after the first one is just the goddamn shaky cam. I can't.
Right. I'm going to say the same thing again, redundantly. I'm going to give the weight to the little bit of the world building, who is this person? I think we kind of figured that out in the first one, and they get their props for that. And anyone else is just going, okay, you see the first fight with him where the cops in the park, where he's sleeping in the park in Europe, and suddenly, okay, he knows how to disarm guys and put them on their ass in 2 seconds. That's cool. We figure out what he can do in the first movie, so nothing's really new in the second movie.
Agreed. We're going to get into some real bangers now. So we're going to go to 1995 with 296 votes above the original. That's Desperado versus El Mariachi. I'm going to say again, it's a sequel, but it's also, again, like Evil Dead 2. It's kind of a redo.
So this is another one where, it's the same thing as Evil Dead, where a director went and figured out how to do this with no money.
$7K.
$7,000. This is one of the most famous stories of somebody doing that and figuring it out. And then you throw some money at them and give them a lot more support, obviously, and they show you what they can really do. This is the better movie.
It's 100% the better movie, and it really introduces us into the troublemaker aesthetic of the mid 90s, where you've got Tarantino in there as a cameo, and they kind of help each other out throughout the 90s. You've got Buscemi. This introduces us to Salma Hayek. It's got a good soundtrack. It's got Tito and the Tarantula in it. This is a lot of fun. It's a lot better than the first one. It's exactly what I think he would have wanted the first one to be had he had the resources.
Except, I don't know if this is just me. You got to tell me where you're at with this. Robert Rodriguez has kind of fallen into my Garden State list.
Okay. Yes, let's talk about this, because I have the exact same opinion, but I'm going to tell you what my level for it is.
Okay. Well, first of all, I think the hokier crap that he got into, the Spy Kids and that kind of stuff like that.
Yeah.
I don't know why that hurt my opinion of movies like this, but it did. I just am like, why didn't you keep trying to figure out the most badass shit?
Yeah.
Which is what you were trying to do here. And where would that have landed now if you hadn't gone a different direction?
So for me, my opinion on that is I think that money ruined this filmmaker. I think that he did his best work when he had the least amount of money and had to do things practically. Because once he started having a bigger paintbrush to use with all the money that he was getting and stuff like that, and he started really going heavy on the CG and the virtual set pieces and stuff like that, that's all he wanted to do. I think Desperado, and then From Dusk Till Dawn, where he was just really lo-fi, practical effects, very low budget, but cool people supporting him. I think that's his best. And then it just gets progressively worse as budgets increase.
Sin City, I think, is kind of a different it's just nuanced that
It is,
he
but it hasn't aged well with me.
Right.
Like,
No,
I
and again-
watched it. I'm like, yeah, it just doesn't.
and again, that I didn't call out a specific movie. I just called out kind of him.
Yeah.
Um,
And like, I like watching the Grindhouse double feature, but if I'm gonna sit and watch one of those two movies, I'm watching Death Proof.
right, absolutely. So I think we're both kind of in the same boat with him, whereas the Robert Rodriguez movies that I like are Desperado and
From Dusk Till Dawn.
Dust Till Dawn.
Yeah.
And then beyond that, like, I'm not necessarily going to pop something in.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with you
And-
100%.
And I watched Planet Terror recently. I watched both movies recently, and I hadn't watched Planet Terror in a long time. And I'm like, I'm good. Like,
The best part of Planet Terror is all the people he has in the movie, like all the guest cast. Like,
so, the stuff that gets me that I like about that movie is just the funny stuff that comes from those grindhouse horror movies.
Right.
Like the kid, like the tone of stuff where
like
the kid shoots
shooting himself, the
and
crazy babysitters.
and just stuff like that. My favorite moment of the whole movie is, you're gonna give me the recipe for that barbecue sauce.
100%.
It's stuff like that it's just like
Michael Biehn and Jeff Fahey as
it's
brothers work
so-
so good.
it's so terrible and it's so perfect, but at the same time I'm just like, I'm good.
All right, let's get into the hot stuff now. This is going to be a big one. 281 votes, 1992, Batman Returns versus 89.
I mean, people have argued this for years. This is one where I like Batman Returns. I think it's a cool movie. Danny DeVito obviously is awesome.
Yeah.
It's the same thing where, the world building, all of that cool shit, that really happened in the first one. And then, Jack Nicholson as the Joker is one of the most epic things ever.
It is. I'm saying Batman 89 100% because, and I love Batman Returns, but this is my problem with Batman Returns that I've talked about, I think, on the podcast before. Batman Returns is the birth of the masturbatory Tim Burton aesthetic, where this is no longer a Batman movie. This is a Tim Burton movie.
Gotcha.
And then every movie after that is even more and more and more and more Tim Burton, where Batman 89 still was a Batman movie, but it was Tim Burton just enough to make it feel like a comic book movie with a great Danny Elfman score. But then it all becomes aesthetic after that. And I feel like with the exception of Ed Wood, it never has been pulled back. He just keeps going further into the paint with all the
I mean, the
Tim
only
Burton
exception to that is Big Fish is kind of its own thing, but
for every big fish, there's 3
Right,
Alice in
right.
Wonderland movies and a Dumbo
right.
remake and all that stuff like that. I get you, but I really feel that Batman Returns, and I think in between Batman and Batman Returns was Edward Scissorhands. Those 2 movies are the ones that it's like, okay, now this is what Tim Burton movies look like.
then also just the direction this kind of sent Batman in the 90s was rough.
Well, it was dark as hell. Well, it was dark as hell. It was darker than the first one. It was so dark that when Schumacher took over, they turned it into like neon campiness
Right.
because of all the people they pissed off with how dark Batman Returns was.
I like this movie. The penguins and stuff at the end, like
It's sluggish.
like I'm good. I think the first one has a little bit where it might even drag a little bit at the end, but everything's got to wrap up, and that's the challenge of any movie is figuring out how to wrap up a movie. I love the original. Like, I grew up watching it a ton. I didn't watch this a ton.
Yeah.
I had both, and just things like that. That's kind of where I draw from. Is it's like I had both movies to watch. Which one do I choose to watch more? That's the one, obviously, that I like better.
And just to kind of put the last little, cherry on top of this one, Batman Returns is the first movie that gave me what I call villain fatigue, where it's like, how many villains do we need in a goddamn movie? Because you have Catwoman, you've got Penguin, and you've got Max Schreck, which are Christopher Walken. All great in their roles, but at the same time, it's like you just see these movies adding more and more and more villains in each version of their film, and they still did it with the Nolan movies. So yeah, I think that was the one where I'm like, okay, how many?
I think the Nolan movies should have included Schwarzenegger as Freeze or Stallone, whichever one that was. I don't remember. They're the same guy, right?
All right, how about this one? This is going to be a hot take. 1989 with 276 votes over the original. Lethal Weapon 2 versus Lethal Weapon 1.
See, that's a cool one to have on this list
It's
because
cool.
it's hard.
That's a hard one.
Like the original, I mean, the fist fight and stuff with Gary Busey. Gary Busey is a badass bad guy to have in that movie.
And then you've got Mitchell Ryan as General McAllister. Two great, really good
Right.
villainous roles. I have to give it to number one because you have to give it to Busey. But also, I mean, this wasn't the first like buddy cop movie. 48 Hours is often given like the credit of like this kind of buddy cop movie. But the chemistry between these two guys, you couldn't do this with any other actors. Like, I think that's what really works. And in Lethal Weapon 2, as much as I love Joe Pesci in everything,
a little painful in that.
He kind of hurts the movie for me. It's just a little too much. Like,
and it's the same in 3.
Yeah,
like,
it's the same in 3. But they tone it down. They don't put him as much in part 3 as they do in part 2.
Right.
So that's why I go with number 1, is that there are better action sequences in Lethal Weapon 2, and the toilet scene is like classic. But Leo makes it a little bit annoying for me, and that's why I stick with 1.
Right. I'm gonna go with 1. Like the stuff with Gary Busey and just the whole way the story plays out is pretty awesome. I like 2. I think it's a great movie. But 1 would be my go-to.
100%. Okay, so we're gonna finish the last 3 of this list, and then we're gonna do a couple honorable mentions of our own. So with 183 votes above the original, Bride of Frankenstein, 1935, 150,000%. Absolutely.
So it's just another one where they've kind of figured out what they're doing a little better, as opposed to, I'm making 2 different movies. No, it's like I'm learning how to make movies, and I'm just getting better as I go. I'd even say the same thing applied earlier to things like Good, the Bad, and the Ugly.
Yeah.
It's like he's just getting better at it.
Right.
That's why, of all those movies, the Sergio Leone movies, what do we like the best?
I like Once Upon a Time in the West best. Yeah, 100%.
Which again came after that.
Yeah.
Because he's just getting better at it.
Right. Bride of Frankenstein, like, so you bring in Elsa Lanchester as the bride, who's great. They have like the storybook ending where it's the beginning with Mary Shelley telling the story, and then they go back and they show all the things that have happened. But you have a closer connection with the monster than you do in the first one. Like the first one really focuses on the doctor.
Right.
And then the pursuit of the monster, where this one really kind of tells a story through the eyes of the monster. And it's just a better movie. And how many times has it been like copied and paid homage to? It's obviously the better one. The monster and the woman story. It's just so good, and everyone agrees. I'm surprised that's not higher on the list, honestly.
Well, of the people that would vote on a list like this,
True.
What percentage
have they actually seen it?
Seen
Both
either,
of them.
Either of the movies, let alone the second one.
100%. Okay, so coming in with 116 votes above the original, Friday the 13th Part 2, 1981, over Friday the 13th Part 1. Yeah.
I mean, same thing. Just they're getting better at making.
They're getting better at it, So, spoilers: if you haven't seen the first one yet, Jason is not the killer in the first one, but he is the killer in the second one, and he doesn't have the hockey mask yet. He's got a burlap sack with one eye cut out. I think that's scarier than the hockey mask. I really like this one a lot, and it does have a great like final girl moment at the end. I think it fixes a lot of the jankiness. Tom Savini's getting better with his special effects and gore effects. Yeah, of all of them, that one is my favorite.
I agree. I think it's definitely a better movie. Better sequel.
And then to finish our list off, number 25, Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome with 103 votes over the original.
I mean, we already hit this. I think, obviously, Road Warrior is the best of those movies.
Against the original, right?
Like, no question.
Right.
So, all right, let's talk about some other movies that we think could be on this list.
So
we already got your Grease 2, so we already know where you stand on that. That's your favorite sequel.
I think Predator 2 is an interesting conversation to have. I don't think it's better than the original, but I watch it more than the original. I think it just does a lot of fun world building that the first one couldn't do because the first one was in the jungle.
So hugely, it's the same conversation to me as... I mean, there's obviously nuance to this, but the Alien to Aliens.
Yeah.
Like it's the same thing where it's kind of an apples and oranges movie, Just yeah, I don't think I can pick one out of the two of these because I would watch one or the other. I think the campiness that comes with having all the big guys in the first one. No, in the first one. The first one. It's
You've got like your G.I. Joe crew.
Like that first act having G.I. Joe go do the jungle.
Yeah. Carl Weathers.
I mean, it's fun.
Jesse Ventura.
The second half of the movie where it's just him versus Predator.
Yeah.
I mean, it's cool, and the way it plays out is cool. Like, I dig it. The second movie, just a totally different world. You've got the comedy stuff that, strangely enough, you also get in Aliens.
Right.
Of
Bill Paxton.
Like all that stuff.
Gary Busey, Morton Downey Jr. Like
it's names that we've already had on this list in things that worked in a good way.
Yeah.
They work in a good way in Predator 2. It's a fun movie. I also love stuff that
like
it shows you a future.
The far future. I love the far future.
That is way too soon to be as different as they make it, and that always amuses me.
The movie comes out in 1990. It takes place in 1997, but the atmosphere is like already gone.
Oh, it's the future. They have Astrovans.
They have Astrovans, and they have like 2 laser sights on a gun. You know, that's what makes it like, futuristic.
Like, this is the future. These don't come out for 2 months. It's like, well, they don't come out for 2 months from when you used them. They came out like 10 months ago, and it's a minivan, bro.
Right. Okay, I got 3 more, and then I'll let you do yours. So I've already talked about one of these on my other podcast. Short Circuit 2 versus the original Short Circuit. I will take Short Circuit 2 all day over the original. Because number one, love you, Steve Guttenberg, but Ali Sheedy just completely ruins the first one. She's always yelling. She's annoying as hell. It's just a terrible performance. You don't have a horse in either of these games.
I'll give you that. I haven't seen a Short Circuit movie in over 30 years.
There you go.
So you and I are different on that. I don't sit around watching Short Circuit movies. I don't sit around watching Fisher Stephen movies. I don't sit around watching Steve Guttenberg movies. So I do watch I do watch Ali Sheedy movies.
Yeah.
At least one. All right. Yeah, I don't have a horse in that race. So
okay, so I'll throw my next one out. Karate Kid 2, I like better than Karate Kid 1. I'm not saying it's a better movie. I just like it better. It's my favorite of the two. I don't even acknowledge part 3. I know one's iconic.
I don't think I can give you that.
Yeah, but
I think they're actually. I think it's fine. Like both movies, I actually like both movies, so I'm not going to bag on 2 at all.
Right.
I like the. I don't know. I mean, it's the tournament stuff that's cooler. Like,
it's got better lines. Like part 1, it's got, put him in a body bag, sweep the leg. There's a lot of more memorable. It's got Zabka. If you have a movie and you're in the 80s in Zabka, then you've got a pretty good douchebag villain.
I'm gonna. Never mind. I like 3 the best. So
there you
go. Moving on.
So I'm gonna say my final one is the one that is not on this list, and that is Color of Money versus The Hustler. Color of Money, my favorite sequel of all time. It's a legacy sequel. We talked about it on our legacy sequel a couple years ago. You're taking like a 25-year gap between the two. You've got the same character bringing up a new guy, but you've got Scorsese doing it. It's just...
So you and I were both kind of in the same boat, and we've been in this boat for all these years, that's a movie we kind of look at as... movie school a little bit.
How to make an amazing movie.
And it's a movie lots of people still have not seen, don't really know. Like we're in a tighter fan club when we're big Color of Money fans. People who know Tom Cruise have seen 80s Tom Cruise movies. They've obviously seen Legend, they've seen Top Gun.
Yeah.
They've seen Rain Man, like they've seen his career progress, and they don't know this movie.
Yeah, they don't. Because it's a Paul Newman movie first. It's a Tom Cruise movie second. But at the end of the day, it's a Martin Scorsese movie. Is my opinion on that one, and it's just so goddamn good. What about you? What do you got some on your list?
I mean, let's go very current. Very current. Dune 2 kicked ass. Dune 2 was awesome. Like it's gotten all the rave reviews that it deserves. I think it was a killer movie. I think it was a killer sequel.
I liked it better than the first one. The first one put me to sleep.
I mean, it's the novel
Yeah.
that is a big part of that. You know, that's why it was ballsy to go do this in the first place, to really go for the big budget current version of this. Squeezing it into a single movie back in the 80s was ballsy also. Like it was.
Right.
Going for this right now, same thing with Blade Runner. Like he had balls to go do Blade Runner 2.
That's an interesting conversation
which is
too.
Awesome. It's like, oh, Blade Runner did not make the money that they hoped. Well, yeah, like neither did the first one, and nobody gives a shit about it other than
Like the diehards like us.
like
Yeah.
we're diehard.
It's my favorite movie of all time. And that's why it's hard, because I know a lot of people who like 2049 better than the first one because they've only seen the first one like maybe once or twice.
Right.
The first one might be on my list of like most watched movies
The
ever for me.
you know I've used
All
it
versions.
too much, but the world building is a big deal.
Yeah.
He had to do that for Dune also, and it gets that weight on that first one. But man, it's just there's more to the story, and it really just is a kick-ass movie, and it looks amazing.
Yeah, 100%. I will agree with you on that. Are those the last two you got? You got any more from? I mean, those are like the big ones, right?
I mean, Dune's just so current that it's a cool one to call out right now. You know, there's so many movies that we loved that have sequels that were just so easy to dismiss. Like, for example, in our younger days, we watched Friday a million times.
Yeah.
It's just one of these examples of throwaway kind of cash grab fun sequels that they kicked out. It's like, yeah, who cares about those movies? Like they really don't even matter.
I can't finish this conversation without something that came from my co-host of my other podcast, where he's like, if you guys are going to talk about sequels, you have to talk about Weekend at Bernie's 2 better being than Weekend at Bernie's 1.
So it's so bizarre that you say that. I literally had that movie on my lips as you said that. That's so bizarre. We're so in tune with some of the stupidest crap. Weekend at Bernie's 2. To me, Weekend at Bernie's 2 is just if Biden gets elected again. But I digress.
You know, I have not watched either of those movies in a long time, but I can tell you that I've seen Weekend at Bernie's 2 more than I've seen the first one. So I'll give him that for that.
There's no way I've seen either movie more than once.
Awesome. Well, this is fun. And, you know, there are so many more sequels out there. I'm looking at a bunch on my shelf right now that we didn't even touch, but we're at our time right now. We can always come back and have this conversation again, but we will definitely have to talk about maybe the Mad Max saga in more detail after we see Furiosa tomorrow, because it's really, to me, exciting to see a generation of people like your boys, for example, who they might not know the original trilogy. Essentially, for them, the trilogy starts with Fury Road. And I think that's going to be interesting to hear what people have to say about this new evolution of George Miller and these characters and this universe, and how that's going to progress in the future.
Yeah, and plus you're excited about things like Twisters coming out. There's things like that where you can't believe they would touch your beloved Twister and
Not mess it up. I've got the glow-in-the-dark Blu-ray.
So we'll see as we get there.
All right. Well, fun conversation. Thanks for coming on again. Definitely have you back on in the near future, everyone. Let us know what you think about our opinions. You can leave them in the comments. Email me, message me at thecultworthy.com. And hey, I'm really excited for Furiosa, so let me know what your comments about that movie are as well.
And I do promise, I know the difference between Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone. I really do. All right, thanks.
And that's where we're going to end it. Have a great night. Thanks for listening.